So that brings us to our next session, and this will shed some light on the Government of India's perspective on this particular subject. And to speak on this topic, may I call upon our Government of India's representative, Mr. Abhishek Agarwal, Senior Specialist Director, NITI Aayog, and he will dwell upon how the Government of India seeks to encourage the adoption of BIM within the construction industry and how it plans to incorporate into the processes to enable a more resilient and sustainable infrastructure development across the country. May we have you on stage, sir? A big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen, for Mr. Agarwal.
Good morning, everyone. I'll start while we are waiting for the hand mic here. What I understand is there are about 150 people online also, and probably all of them are not an expert in BIM as of now. So what I'm going to start with is a journey that we sort of undertook over the past 3 years jointly with FCDO. Slightly before that, as Indian government itself, the kind of initiatives that we have been undertaking as part of infrastructure. Perfect. As part of infrastructure, and we'll go forward with what the expectations of the government are with all the different stakeholders that are there in this sector. Let's start with a particular image. Now, this is an image from 1970s. And this is a very famous cartoon by Sri R.K. Lakshman, late Sri R.K. Lakshman. Now, if you think that this is just a joke, then that there is a tree which is growing in between a railway line while it was getting constructed, you need to think again. It was a reality probably, because till recently, till 5 years back, the scenario was that the kind of disbursement that we were doing in different infrastructure sectors, it took us time to complete a typical project. Now, just look at the railways. If the kind of disbursement that we were making in railways, we continued with that without prioritizing, we would have taken 40 years to complete every single railway project. And the average for India was about 13 years. This is not the case now. This was a case probably in early 2010s, but definitely not in the 2020s. So what has changed since then? A lot has changed. But why was it important? The first thing that we started with was prioritizing our investments. So we came up with something called the India Infrastructure Pipeline, the National Infrastructure Pipeline. We identified about 9,500 projects, and these were amounting to 111 lakh crores, which is basically $1.4 trillion in those days. Now, when we added the state projects to this number, we had roughly 160 lakh crores, which is $2 trillion of investment that was envisaged in 2019 for the first 5 years. Now, this is a pipeline which we use for prioritizing at that time. It does not mean that it's just this which is going to continue. There are going to be more projects which get added over a period of time. Now, why is it important? As Reddy sir just mentioned, we are having almost 35% of our capital expenditure, of our budget given in capital expenditure every year. And this is increasing year by year. The budget is increasing, the capital expenditure is also increasing. And we are also monitoring each project that is being implemented. Roughly 1,600, 700 projects as on date, beyond 150 crores worth each project, they are being monitored. And 22 to 23% of these projects, they show cost overruns. And 45% of these have time overruns. It does not mean that the situation is bad, it's improving. What we have seen is that certain sectors which account for almost 50% of the projects, they have minimal cost and time overruns. They are having efficiencies of almost 95% in terms of meeting their timelines. But that also means that the other sectors, which are probably slightly more complex, they are still showing some cost and time overruns. Now, what does this mean? It means that each project is having certain risks throughout its life cycle. First of all, the life cycle is going to have 4 major stages: the conceptualization, design development, construction, and operations and maintenance. There will be one more part, which is the disposal. Probably we are not at that situation right now as far as India is concerned. We are not really talking about disposal of infrastructure assets as of now, but the rest of 4 stages, they have different risks. These are just indicative, which peak at different time. So why is it important? It is important because each of this risk has to be managed. And we have certain capacity to manage these risks, which is the green line that you can see here. Now, if you are managing these risks within this green line, it is fine. But the moment you exceed your time or resources beyond that, then you have to incur additional amount of expenditure, and that additional amount of expenditure keeps growing exponentially. So the moment a project starts getting delayed, the costs associated with that project also start getting delayed, increasing exponentially. Now, if we have to manage these risks, we have to look at the primary reasons why our projects are getting delayed. So because we are increasingly working on the granularity of each project, we started looking at the primary reasons which are leading to delays in projects. And what we realized is land acquisition and force majeure, they account for 40% of the delays. If we add clearances, it comes to 60%. But 60% of these delays, other than land probably, they are all addressed by project preparatory activities, better project management, better project implementation activities, including financing, budgeting, actual stakeholder engagement and coordination. And we just need to address these issues right from the start of the project to address the delays in the project. Now, there was a wonderful World Bank study that came in 2020-21, which was talking about infrastructure governance. If you start investing in infrastructure governance, which is basically you improve your processes, you improve your decision-making process, you bring in technology adoption and all those aspects, digitalization, you gain 20% in terms of efficiency of the same investment that you are going to make in infrastructure sector. And with this, we started looking at what 9 major issues or themes of infrastructure governance that we need to address. Now, these themes, we started addressing with certain programs. The foremost being Gati Shakti. So you can see that they are all color-coded. So 4 of the first 4 issues are being addressed through Gati Shakti and rapid initiatives in terms of inclusive, green, resilient development, quality infrastructure initiatives, and like that. We are trying to ensure that each investment that we are making is related to a particular output and an outcome in the bigger context of policies. So we have an output-outcome monitoring framework. We also understand that capacity building is one of the key constraints whenever we want to make any improvements. So capacity building program has been established. There is a capacity building commission which is there. I believe they are also going to be participating in this workshop today. There is a certain focus on ensuring availability of finances, whether it is PPPs, whether it is government spending, alternative sources of financing like value capture financing, or monetizing your existing projects. And there is a particular focus on legal aspects, which means we are developing model concession agreements, we are developing innovative ways for conciliation of any legal issues, hassles, aspects there. Now still, one of the biggest comes in terms of the project management practices, BIM, which is going to feed into all of these systems again. Now, why BIM? First thing, construction and infrastructure accounts for almost 8 to 9% of our GDP and roughly 12% of the entire employment. But It is the second least digitalized sector in our country. And BIM is basically a manifestation of digitalization of infrastructure sector in entirety. Now, why is it important? We understand that 1 in 5 days is lost in just searching the correct information for any infrastructure project. And that is where BIM comes in and plays a major role. What we understand is, if we just utilize BIM and use all these infrastructure governance initiatives, we are going to have a direct impact in terms of savings of money, which can be reinvested into infrastructure, and they will lead to a direct job creation of 1 million to 2.5 million, anywhere between that, skilled and unskilled labor. Yeah, so what is infrastructure? RBI defines some categories of infrastructure. Now these are primarily from the perspective of lending and investment. There might be many more categories, but these are definitely on the priority. Now, with this, we need to understand that the governance in India is extremely complex. Why? We have more than 1,300 to 1,400 schemes or programs running at any given point in time in India. And this is at national level. When you start going down to the state levels, each state, I'm talking about the average size state, I'm not talking about the larger states like Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. They typically have 500 to 700 schemes and programs functioning. And at a typical district, you have roughly around 200 to 300 programs or schemes functioning. Why is this important? This is important because you have a very high representation of the number of departments that are there. 50 ministries and more than 200 departments at national level. Similarly, 30 to 50 ministries. In case of Uttar Pradesh, it is 90 ministries or department in case of Uttar Pradesh. And similarly at district level. Now, each project that we are going to invest in, it will have some component, maybe funding, maybe prioritization, maybe implementation by the national party, some role of the state government, maybe in terms of clearances, maybe in terms of giving land and things, some role of the district, again clearances, land, probably the investment, maybe they are the leaders of investing, and of course the local bodies who are going to give you the final approvals, clearances, the localized benefits, utilities, everything is going to be there with the local bodies. So all of these projects, they need to come in and converge. With this, the complexity becomes in terms of number of infrastructure players. So typically we tend to think that government is a major player. Of course, government is a major player, which you can see in terms of this blue shade. So you have primary stakeholders for each project, maybe secondary stakeholders, maybe tertiary stakeholders. But an equally important player comes in the form of a private sector. So you will have contractors, consultants, and number of service providers, they all come into picture. And then we cannot forget the civil society, especially in case of BIM, when we want to scale it up, we will need training centers, we will need academia support, we will need research centers, and number of interventions that are going to be there in terms of civil society. And for each of these projects, we need to bring all of these players, maybe 10 players, 15 players, 20 players together in the form of a convergence. Now we are undertaking this convergence approach at two levels. One is we are looking at the whole of government approach. Now this is the embodied in the form of Gati Shakti approach. But we are not here to talk about Gati Shakti today. We are going to talk about the whole of project approach. So the whole of government approach, all the government schemes, departments, programs, whole of project, for that particular project, every aspect of the project needs to be integrated. What that means is the project itself, the future phases of the project, that same project, that project might be a part of a program. So collection of projects, creating the entire program, and of course, when it becomes a collection of program, it comes up to our Gati Shakti approach. Now, as I said, we have a full life cycle. What we tend to think is that the CapEx is the maximum investment. Yes, we are going to make 35% of our investments in capital expenditure, say for the next 5 to 10 years. But there is going to be a much bigger phase of operations and maintenance, which is going to last, I don't know, for some projects 20 years, 70 years, 100 years probably. If we look at the globally developed countries, how they are spending, what is the ratio of their expenditure, then approximately 20 to 25% is coming in CapEx. Almost 80% is coming in their operational phase. And this is something that we need to be prepared for. And why? Not just expenditure. What we tend to do is we tend to lose information. So we have started conceptualizing a project. We prepared detailed design reports. Now, a report which was prepared is now transferred to a contractor, and you see a crash of the information which used to be there. And then it starts growing up again. And the moment the contractor leaves and the operation and maintenance person comes in, again substantial information is lost here. And then we have to start looking at this curve again, and then this person starts losing interest, and the information keeps going down. So we cannot continue a refurbishment or a disposal cycle at a later date. We just don't have any information at that time. Why is it so? The primary challenge that is there is because there are multiple players that are involved, and each is interacting directly. So they have multiple versions of truth. Let's talk about it with a very simple example. If I say a white flower, everyone in this room, everyone online is going to probably imagine a different kind of a flower based on your experiences, your exposure and stuff. So I've just mentioned a few. White flower in India, you might imagine Rajnigandha, Champa, rose, chameli, n number of things. Now probably two people might end up imagining rose, but that rose can be again in a very different stage. It can be a fully bloom, it can be in bud, or maybe it will have dewdrops or something of that sort, So everyone has a different imagination, have a different version of truth, but all of those things are truth. So we don't want that thing to happen. What we want is a basic thing. Everyone looks at exactly the same picture. It becomes a common data environment for everyone. Everyone takes in from there and gives it back to that whole system. And it becomes a single version of truth. What it also means is, if an architect is approving certain drawings, the approved version is the final version which the contractor is going to use, the structural designer is going to use for that design. Now, this is the basic concept where BIM comes up. Now, with building information modeling, we need to understand that this is a thread. This is like a thread which goes through the entire life cycle of the project. And it has to be software agnostic. Very important point. It has to be software agnostic. Why? Because each player at each stage will use a different software which is specifically for them. So it's not a software service. Softwares are important. It's more about how information is being transformed from one system to another, how people are interacting between those two different softwares. So we have to ensure that the right people get the right information at the right place and at the right time, and that throughout the project life. Now this is something very basic, BIM. We have come to BIM. Now, does that mean that we are going to construct everything digitally before physically? Yes. So we are going to be better prepared for the project. But does that mean that we are only talking about a 3D model of a particular project? No. It is much, much more beyond that. And this is something that we need to understand, because what I've seen in my interaction with many projects, ministries, is they think BIM means a 3D model of a particular project. No, BIM is much beyond that. BIM is having multiple stages. 3D definitely is one of the most important aspects, but you have to add in your time scheduling systems, your cost estimation systems, your ERPs of the government. your operations and maintenance systems, facilities management, and when we are really ready, probably 1 or 2 projects in India are already using your sustainability and energy consumption systems throughout the project, in the construction phase as well as in the operations and maintenance phase. You also need to have very clear understanding of what level of detailing you are going to capture. It does not mean that a system with 7D will necessarily need LOD 500, which is the highest level of detail. It might be fair enough if I go in with 300 or 400 also. But you really need to decide at what level of detailing you need to reach. But why is it important? It is important because it's going to save us a lot of time, money. Yes, we have seen that. Maintenance cost, we have seen that also. Efficiencies in terms of information. It's also going to reduce carbon emission, as you just mentioned. It's going to reduce water consumption. 10% of water consumption is something that possibly might be targeted. Now, Arup gave us these indicative numbers, and that is based on their experience globally. So what we understand is it's not just water, it's also going to give positive externalities in terms of R&D, construction R&D. And we will have a demand of skilled professionals also in near future. So all in all, adoption of BIM is definitely going to be helpful. Now, what it means in terms of costing. You have to invest slightly higher at the initial phase, but you are going to reap benefits. This entire green shade is going to be your benefit throughout the project life cycle. Second, in terms of information, there is not going to be any dip. It is just going to keep increasing. Now, we all know information is the new economic resource. You can do wonders when you have so much of information. Third, directly going to impact 10 SDG goals. It's not just 1 or 2 of infrastructure. 10 different SDG goals are directly going to be impacted by using BIM. Fourth, this is the last one, as far as the benefits are concerned. Globally, everyone is adopting BIM. We have also been adopting BIM. Now, some people, they have mandated BIM as a compulsory thing, as a mandatory thing, as part of their infrastructure investments. India has not yet done that. There are some sporadic interventions. There are some sort of alliances that have been created depending on regions. South America, LATAM alliances. Europe, wherein I believe UK is also there, if I'm not mistaken. And there is an upcoming East Asia network, which is coming up for BIM. Probably, we are not there at the stage of alliance right now, but most important, what we are told, 30% of the global BIM work is actually being done from India. So it's not like we do not have the capacities, we do not have the understanding, we do not have the kind of human resources technology. We do have it. But 30% of the global work is being done in India. I'm not sure, but can we increase it to 60% and say the rest of the 30% is done for India? Maybe something that is that we want to look at. Now, how do we go about it? So we started looking at the kind of projects that are already using BIM in India. And it's not like just 1 or 2 different projects. There are a large number of projects which are using BIM in some form in India. Now, when I say BIM, some projects, especially in urban area, might not be using BIM in its real concept, but they have been very high on digitalization by using SCADA and related services. So SCADA and these kind of things, they also directly fill into the BIM system, and that is where it becomes important. The biggest projects, the most flagship projects have become metro projects. Almost every single new metro today is utilizing BIM. And of course, one of the finest examples in India, the RRTS project, the Rapid Rail project between Delhi and Meerut. It is one of the prime examples. Why I say so is because they are going to share their details, but what I understand is they have probably cut off 6 months in their entire construction timeline. And they are one of the projects which is going to talk about right up to the 7D level of BIM. They are talking about energy consumptions, movement patterns of these people in station. Everything is going to be monitored on the BIM system. Now, if we want to adopt it, the challenges. Most commonly, we tend to think about these challenges which are at the top. These are what we see. But there are many, many more nitty-gritties, whether it is in terms of the education system, which is accepting the BIM or making BIM as an integral part of the engineering management courses, or it is in terms of software or oligopolistic markets, open BIM versus closed BIM kind of concepts, whether it is about people accepting BIM, the mindset change in the government, in the private sector, in the students of accepting BIM, or is it going to be something which we are not really thinking about it right now, which can be something as like data tsunami. There's going to be so much of data that you don't know what to do about it. There are going to be n number of challenges that we need to be addressing. But of course, the biggest ones are going to be these green ones, and these are going to be addressed as and when we progress with them. Now, what are the initiatives? So we have certain initiatives. FCDO has been working with us for last 3 years, and they shared some examples from across the world, and we jointly developed a sort of bracketing of the kind of interventions that need to go there when we talk about BIM. And these were categorized under 4 aspects: public leadership, communicate vision, and foster communities. We have BIM Association, CDCP officials here. Grow the industry capacity and build a common set of framework, including your standards. Now, what you see here in the red ones are the ones which are yet to be completed. The ones in ochre color or brown color, they are in advanced stages, and the ones in green are sort of already well established, being done as we are talking about it, and we believe that they will be continued in future as well. Another aspect that we started looking at is that when we want to create this entire ecosystem of BIM, we'll have to start looking at it, those issues, bracket them under 4 cases, which is business case, creating a governance case, bring in a mindset change, which is going to be very, very important, build capacities, and then a common collaborative framework, which we already saw. But this has to be done at 3 levels. At an individual level, as in a person like you and me, we have to understand BIM, we have to adopt BIM, we have to bring BIM, we have to be upgraded to bringing BIM in our regular day work. But as an organization, we have to look at the entire processes. So we'll have to address the issues in terms of organization, plus the ecosystem. So when we were looking at those interventions that we are doing at the Indian government level, we are going to bracket them in terms of this challenge, identify the challenges in terms of this matrix, and address them based on this particular matrix. Now, each different stakeholder that we saw earlier is going to have a role which they are going to play here. Now, I'm not going to dwell much there. What I'm coming to is, we have looked at the detail of all the 9,500 projects, to be more specific, 9,077 projects that are ongoing right now. So we maintain a wonderful database. Anybody can see it. It's available on India Investment Grid. We looked at each project, categorized those projects into certain important sectors. And what you see here are 7 extremely important sectors from our perspective, where BIM can be looked at. And the categorization further looked at in terms of their status, whether they are completed, implementation stage, under development, or concept, and whether they are complex or not. So from very high complexity to virtually no complexity. We looked at these projects and started putting them in the system. Now, if this faintly colored box you can see our priority would go from this direction to this direction when we start adopting BIM. Probably the thresholds will also be defined in terms of the amount of investment that is going into each particular project. And for ensuring that these projects are going to utilize BIM, what we understand is right now human resource is going to be the one primary concern. Yes, we are doing 30% of the global work, but within the government systems and for Indian projects, where do we get our human resources for? This is where again FCDO and Arup came in and helped us by understanding the entire ecosystem and giving us these 4 major categories, which basically means strategic, tactical, and production. All our categories are defined across this, and some we will need new human resources, some we can capacitate the existing people. Now, we looked at the numbers. So based on those projects, next 10 years, and specifically next 3 years, what is the kind of numbers that we are looking at in terms of human resources? So we will need roughly 24 to 25,000 people in the government system who are conversant with BIM in entirety. Maybe 10,000 for the next 3 years. 1 lakh to 1 lakh 10,000 people in private sector. Maybe 50,000 in the next 3 years. And we'll need to build capacities of existing human resources in terms of 1,30,000 to 1,40,000 people overall, maybe 60, 65,000 in the next 3 years. Now, what we are not sure is the number of institutes and certification centers that we already have in the country, the number of professionals that are already existing there, and what is the capacity of these institutes to improve the capacity of these professionals. So this is something that we are working on right now. In addition to this, we have certain expectations from different ministries, departments, each stakeholder. Of course, the first one, we need some standards. So Bureau of Indian Standards, it has already formed a working group. They are establishing standards. They are establishing guidelines for using BIM. What we also want is something like a code of good practices, probably if they can work on it, and give a very clear timeline. Now, this working group has been there for some time. We are told probably 1 year is another timeline we can look at when everything will be completed. Can we sort of hasten it? Secondly, we want to ensure that there is a conformance and quality control system also put in place so that organizations, they start getting these certifications at organization level itself. Secondly, all the national ministries should look at their own policies and start adopting BIM as an organizational policy, which very few people have done already. For this, it's not just that you need to mention BIM as a contract, which is happening in many cases right now. What we need is some sort of relook at your own internal processes, something what Mahua has recently done, the Ministry of Urban and Housing Affairs. Look at the standard operating procedures that are going to be required, create employers' information requirements which are going to be shared with your contractors, consultants, and all those people. Create clear BIM execution plans, not just at organization level, but also at each project level. Define your own threshold. Maybe some ministries handling projects worth 1,000 crores. Some ministries, they are typically having projects worth 100 crores. You define your own threshold for phasing it out. You define your new project pipeline and define internal champions of change who are going to change the mindset within your ministries, departments, and agencies, and collaborate with academia for training and certification purposes. Specific asks from NCRTCs, metros, Mahua. You have done a wonderful job. Share your experience, document it, put it up on knowledge portals, put it up on Indian knowledge portals, global knowledge portals. Probably create a team within your system which can be tasked just to do this. This is extremely important. We look up to you to drive this thing forward. DEA, Department of Economic Affairs and Legal Affairs. Please look at making BIM mandatory. Relook at the procurement standards, give them a model, sort of a document which can be utilized for creating EIRs, EBRs, RFPs, and all those things. Capacity Building Commission. Introduction and sensitization of the government people at all three levels, individuals, organizations, and ecosystem. We don't want you to teach BIM, train people in BIM, but what we want you to do is help people embrace digitalization, create courses, create content towards digitalization and BIM concepts. Help people understand how they can evaluate their own processes, create their own SOPs and things like that. And when an organization is going to adopt BIM as a policy, they are going to need an understanding of the BIM market. So help them create capacities in how to go about the market assessment for BIM. Second last slide. Academia and certification agencies, most important, they are going to define the BIM pedagogy, the curriculum. You have to jointly arrive at it. We have a large number of technical colleges in India, but hardly 10 or 15 of them are probably teaching BIM, or BIM is part of their regular course. We want to take it to the very last technical college that is there in India. But the leaders, the IITs, CEPT, NICMAR, Symbiosis, these kind of institutes, they will have to lead it from the front. They will have to come together, create the pedagogy, curriculum that all the others might want to accept. AICTE will need to approve such pedagogies, guidelines, ensure that all the other courses are in conformance, and periodically updating them. What we also need is mid-career refresher programs. Now, these can come up not just from the institutes, they can also come up with through certification agencies, not just from India, but from across the world also. We have a huge demand, so I believe there is ample scope for everyone to play a role here. Last but not the least, we have a very specific ask from the multilaterals and bilaterals. Support in building the capacity for BIM in India. Bring use cases from across the world. We need to understand a lot about it. There was a case wherein I was sitting in a meeting and people just came in and said, oh, BIM is good for linear projects because metros are doing. No. Probably BIM are best suited for the most complex buildings, which they do not understand. So bring in large number of use cases, good practices, expertise and knowledge from your global experiences. Try to expose the Indian professionals, the Indian government, the Indian experts with the international practices, exposures. And whenever you are doing a program or a mandate with the government, try to ensure that BIM is an integral component of that particular mandate. Civil society, our friends from CDCP and IBEMA. IBEMA is, I think some people are here, Indian BIM Association, and some people are online. You will have to ensure that the awareness generation is sustained, that more and more people are going to collaborate with ministries, with private sector, with public sector, consultants, academia, and everyone. And not just that, you will also have to ensure that you are collaborating together, you come together, create sort of an organization. We don't want IBEMA, CDCP, and the likes to compete with each other. We want them all to collaborate. That is all that is the essence of BIM, essentially. And with this, I'll say thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Agarwal, for such a valuable and insightful talk. I hope the audience has taken note of all the key takeaways and the upcoming opportunities in the industry. And once again, may I request Ms. Elizabeth Atwell, Head of Infrastructure and Urban Development from British High Commission, to present a memento. A big round of applause for Mr. Agarwal, ladies and gentlemen.